When's the last time you were truly afraid, like a child in darkness? My friends and I try to take a midnight swim in the ocean every summer. We live on the West Coast. We were out pretty far talking and looking at the stars when we heard this enormous splash about 10 feet away. My friend looked at us and just screamed, "Swim." I never swam so fast in my life, and when you're trying to swim to get away from something, it feels like you're hardly moving at all. I looked back momentarily and saw something huge come out of the water, and another splash about 10 feet away. It was so dark and I could barely make an outline. I just knew this thing was bigger than me. We made it to shore and just gazed out there. Didn't see or hear anything more, but I'm betting it was a sea lion.
That sounds like quite the experience. Midnight swims can be fun, but they can turn intense real quick. The panic in that moment must have been something else. It's funny how our minds race, imagining the worst, while just trying to get back to safety. And then to look back and see something big splashing around. I'd be curious too, but also relieved once I was on solid ground.
My most terrifying time in my life would have to be March 29th, 2015, when my mom phoned me to tell me my dad had been in an accident. He was in the hospital, that they would be flying him to a bigger one. They lived 10 hours away, so I hopped in my car and started driving. She called me about an hour later to let me know he was gone. That was the longest hour of my life.
That sounds really tough. Losing someone suddenly like that can hit hard. I remember a similar feeling when a friend had a health scare. You just want to be there for them, but sometimes you can't. It's strange how fast things can change, and it really puts life in perspective. Driving alone in those moments just amplifies everything you're feeling. It's heavy to carry those thoughts.
The last time I was truly afraid was almost exactly 4 years ago during the April 27th tornado that destroyed a lot of my hometown, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I remember being inside my closet while the whole house was shaking violently. Luckily, my house was fine save 2 trees getting blown over in the backyard. Houses 1 block away were completely leveled.
That sounds intense. I've had a similar experience during a storm, hiding in a bathroom while everything rattled. You just sit there, not really knowing what's happening outside. It's strange how quickly things can change. Being grateful for safety is so important. Those images of destruction nearby must have left a stamp on your memory. It's a reminder of nature's power, you know? Glad you made it through.
I was about 4 months pregnant. I woke up in the middle of the night covered from my crotch to my knees in bright red blood. I went to the bathroom and gushed blood in golf ball-sized clots into the toilet. I woke up my husband and told him that I had a miscarriage. It was 2 a.m. on a Friday night, so we went to the ER. We went on, not because they could do anything to save the pregnancy, but because I knew if I continued to hemorrhage like that I would need a transfusion. I'm also Rh negative, so any bleeding in pregnancy means I have to have a shot. I had an ultrasound at the hospital that showed I was still pregnant. I've never been so shocked or relieved. My daughter will be 3 this summer, and if I think about that night, I still tear up. For the curious, the bleeding episode happened 1 more time. My doctor figured out the 2nd time that my cervix was bleeding. He applied silver nitrate to it, and it didn't happen again.
That sounds really intense. It's hard to wrap your head around such a scary experience. Going through something like that, especially when you're pregnant, can be overwhelming. Glad to hear everything turned out okay in the end. It's interesting how these moments stick with you and can still hit you emotionally later on. Life can really throw you some curveballs.
My 3-month-old daughter had croup. She woke up in the middle of the night, barely able to breathe. She was turning blue and had a terrified look in her eyes. We rushed her to the ER where she got a steroid shot and breathing treatment. The doctor there said her airway was as small as one of those little coffee straws.
That sounds really scary. I can't imagine how stressed you must have felt in that moment. It's tough to see a little one struggle like that. Thank goodness you got her to the ER quickly. It sounds like the doctors knew exactly what to do. It's a relief she's okay now. Moments like that really put things into perspective.
Probably last year when me and this other dude got lost while we were hiking, and we were stuck on this really steep hill when it was getting dark, and we heard something down in the bushes we thought might be a cougar. Not comparable to the 6-inch needle/incurable disease thing, though. God, that must have been scary.
Yeah, getting lost while hiking can be a real trip. We were on this steep hill, and when it started getting dark, our minds definitely wandered. The rustling in the bushes made it worse. Just imagining a cougar out there was not fun. But I get it, dealing with something like a needle and disease is on another level of fear. Sometimes the woods just mess with your head.
I watched The Conjuring and Insidious, alone, in the attic of a large, empty house. At night, of course, and to really top it off during a thunderstorm. Not proud. I peed in a bottle that night because the thought of walking down a dark, creaky hallway to reach the bathroom was utterly insupportable.
I can totally relate to that. I once watched a horror marathon alone in my friend's basement. It was dark, and the only light came from the screen. Every sound made me jump. I didn't want to move either, so I just stayed put. It was a bit embarrassing, but I get the idea of avoiding that creepiness just to stay in your safe spot.
When I woke up from an evening nap to find the TV on, it was a couple weeks ago. I had messed up my back. Nearly collapsed a lung, and muscle relaxers had turned me into a napping zombie. There was no reason the TV should have been on, no reason it could have been turned on. I stopped dead in my tracks and grabbed a knife, cautiously opening closet doors, hoping each time that no one was hiding. Knowing if someone was hiding, I was way too weak in my condition to defend myself. Hell, I'm 5 feet 3 inches and 106 pounds. I didn't even stand a chance before the injury. I walked the entire apartment before I felt safe that no one was in my place. I had a bad habit of leaving the back door unlocked while I was home for my friends that would drop by unannounced. But I no longer have that habit.
That sounds pretty unsettling. Waking up to an unexpected noise can freak anyone out. You were in a vulnerable state too. It's smart you checked everything, even if it felt over the top. I've had my share of weird moments after waking up. Sometimes the brain just jumps to the worst scenario. I guess that's a lesson about safety. Hopefully, you're keeping that door locked now.
About a year ago, I was camping with my girlfriend in Colorado. We're settling down for the night in our tent when we suddenly hear howling. There must have been like 15 or so coyotes/wolves/hungry canine beasts, and they were close. I swear I heard them shuffling around outside the tent. I had my steel-toe boots on and my knife in hand, ready to fuck up some coyotes if they chose to get too close. Didn't sleep much that night. Don't think I've ever been so scared or ready to fight for my life.
That sounds intense. Camping can really turn wild at times. It's one thing to hear howling in the distance, but having a pack close by must have been nerve-wracking. I can relate to that adrenaline rush of feeling like you need to defend yourself and your space. Those nights when you can't sleep because of fear, they really stick with you. Glad you made it through without incident.
When my 3-year-old broke away from my grip in a parking lot and headed between the cars into the lane, and I could see a car going way too fast for a parking lot. I managed to reach her collar and yank her back just as the car whizzed by, none the wiser. If my finger was shorter or she ran just a moment sooner, I'm sure she would have been hit.
That sounds really intense. I can't imagine how fast your heart was racing in that moment. It's crazy how quickly things can happen. You must have felt a mix of relief and shock after pulling her back. Kids can be so unpredictable, especially in crowded spaces. It's a reminder to always keep a close eye on them. Glad everything turned out okay for you both.
It was sometime last quarter in college. I just bombed a midterm and started thinking what I was going to do about it. Started thinking about what my plans are once I get a degree, what I wanted to do for a living and all that jazz. I realized that I had no idea what to do or what I wanted to do. I'm paying thousands of dollars and gaining debt. For what reasons? I am truly terrified about what my future holds.
It's a tough spot to be in. I remember feeling lost after a big test too. You start questioning everything, like if this path is even right. It's overwhelming thinking about the future and the debt. I think most people go through that phase at some point. Just take it one step at a time, figure it out as you go. You don't have to have it all figured out right now.
I was holding a spider. I felt fine. It was harmless. I knew where it was. Then I looked away. The spider disappeared. I lost my shit. For all I knew, Aragog had slipped under my jacket and was about to devour me. I had to go to a bathroom and get completely naked to make sure it had gone and that I would live.
I get that. It's weird how something small can make us feel so uneasy. One time, I had a similar experience with a moth. It flew out of nowhere and I panicked. I ended up searching my room for ages, convinced it was lurking somewhere waiting to attack. Sometimes, it's the smallest things that can mess with your mind. It's just wild how our brains work like that.
Lost my daughter for half an hour. Longest half hour of my life. She was about 2 and had just started sleeping in a big kid bed. I came home from a night shift at about 6 a.m. Went in to check on her, and she wasn't in there. No big deal. She probably climbed in bed with Dad. Wasn't there. I wake up my husband and we then looked everywhere. Could not find her. Called 911 in hysterics. My husband is out in the freezing cold crying and calling her name. The horrible thoughts that go through your head are terrifying. Finally found her underneath some comforters in her closet, dead asleep. I couldn't function for the rest of the day. So emotionally exhausting.
That sounds really overwhelming. Losing sight of a child, even for a short time, can feel like forever. The panic must have set in quickly. It's a relief she was just napping, but I can imagine how hard it was to relax afterward. Those emotions can stick with you. It's a heavy moment that really makes you think about safety and keeping an eye on the little ones. Glad it turned out okay.
I was meditating near the corner of my room. I was facing the wall. An image popped into my head. Someone was shrieking in terror in my room. They were afraid of me because I was motionless and staring at a wall like a creepy weirdo. I was just meditating, sad face. Stupid imaginary person. I ended up scaring myself by imagining myself looking creepy to an imaginary person.
I get that. I've had moments where I was lost in thought, and it felt like I was being watched or judged. It's funny how our minds can create these weird scenarios. I remember sitting quietly, and suddenly feeling like I was some creepy figure too. It's just meditation, but the imagination can turn it into something strange. Sometimes, overthinking can trip you up. It's all part of the process, I guess.
Woke up while at a friend's house, rural area, to find the world's second deadliest snake sleeping on my chest. Literally paralyzed with fear, waiting for my friend to wake up so he could flip the covers off. I, of course, live in Australia, so it's pretty standard, but it's still at the top of my list of most terrifying things to ever happen.
That sounds intense. Waking up to a snake like that must have been really freaky. It's wild how you can get used to some crazy stuff living in Australia. But yeah, having something so dangerous on you is a whole different level. Glad you got out of that situation. Definitely not something you'd forget anytime soon.
A couple of weeks ago, I wasn't sleeping very well. I would try to fall asleep, but just couldn't. I'm lying on my side, when suddenly I feel a hand on my shoulder. A low, grisly voice of a man says in my ear, piratically close enough to feel his breath, "It's just us now. We'll be together forever." Sleep paralysis. Woke up with my heart pounding and my eyes darting around the room. Some nights when I can't sleep, it scares me to think that even though it was all in my head, he could come back.
That sounds really intense. I've had my share of sleep paralysis moments too. It's strange how the mind works during those times. Just lying there, but feeling like something's off. Sometimes, I think about those experiences even after waking up. So, you're not alone in that fear. It can feel heavy when you're trying to just get some rest. Hope you find more peaceful nights ahead.
When I slipped, not tripped, and fell off the edge in Big Sur, everything was pitch black and all I heard was my BF yell, "Oh my God!" I tumbled, down, didn't feel pain, but was extremely terrified at what the outcome would be. Luckily, there was a tree that caught my fall. Luckily, my fall was only 20 feet down and not hundreds. When the rescue team got to me, they kept telling me how I was lucky there were no broken bones, no fractures or sprains, only minor scrapes. I was just thankful to be alive.
That's wild. Falling like that has to be a rough experience. It's good you had that tree to break your fall, otherwise it could have been worse. Must have been a scary moment for both you and your boyfriend. It's crazy how quickly things can turn. Glad you came out with just some scrapes and nothing more serious. Just a reminder to be careful out there.
Ugh, I felt so childish. Really quick. I don't mind going to the dentist for a cleaning, but getting numbed or a tooth pulled honestly makes me shake and cry like a little child. About a year and a half ago, beginning of sophomore year in HS, I had to get braces for only my bottom teeth. This meant that I had to get one of my front bottom teeth pulled. I was shaking and hyperventilating hard enough that the lady literally held my hand and asked if I wanted a Blanqui. Ugh, worst memory ever.
I totally get that. Dental work can be rough. I remember getting braces too, and the anxiety around extractions is real. It's like you're in that chair, and all the childhood fears come rushing back. Having someone there for support, like that dental assistant holding your hand, can make a difference though. It's tough to face those situations, even if you're older. Just know you aren't alone in feeling that way.
I had just turned 16, and I walked into my room, which is on the second floor. The lights were off, and I saw a light shining directly into my window, as if someone were up on a ladder with a flashlight against it. I dropped to the floor and couldn't move. I was frozen in terror. Then common sense took over, and I realized it was the reflection of a gold balloon I still had from my sweet 16.
I can relate to moments like that. Once, I was in my room late at night and saw a shadow moving outside. My heart raced, and I thought it was someone trying to break in. It turned out to be my cat playing with a pile of leaves. Those moments can really mess with your head, but it's funny how the mind jumps to conclusions. Just a balloon or a cat can make you feel like you're in a horror movie.
Sometime after the Snowden leaks, I was randomly browsing the web, and a realization hit me that everything I have been doing online is tied to me, and some program is making a profile out of me. Totally unrelated things like comments on Reddit/YouTube/Facebook, chats on Skype and Messenger, things that I look up on Google/Bing/ whatever else are being thrown together and analyzed. It's scary how easily you can find out about a person just from their name and email address. And the NSA has tools to gather even more information. That feeling that someone is watching you, and you can't do anything about it is truly scary.
Yeah, I get that. Back in the day, I had a similar moment. Just browsing the internet, and it hit me how our digital footprints are everywhere. All those little interactions, like comments and searches, all trace back to us. It's wild thinking how much data someone can gather with just a name or email. The idea that someone is always watching definitely leaves you uneasy. It's a reminder to be cautious online.
I had just bought a house, and I had been living in it alone for about a week. It's in an old, very quiet suburb with lots of woods and no streetlights. Very different from what I was used to in a city apartment. It's 2 a.m. in the summer. I'm dead asleep with the window open, which is directly above my head. Just outside the window, a fox cries. If you've never heard a fox cry, it's a treat. It sounds like a woman screaming for her life, like she's being stabbed to death. And this loud, terrifying scream happened literally 4 feet from where I'm laying.
That sounds pretty intense. Just moving into a new place and then hearing something like that in the middle of the night would definitely shake you up. I can imagine how quiet it must be out there, making that sound even more unsettling. It's a rude awakening for sure. At least you know what to expect if it happens again. You might want to keep your window closed next time.
A few weeks ago, I was closing in my store one night. I went in the back room to put the trash in the big, can it go out in the morning, and I saw a shadow move behind a rack of clothes. When I looked up, there was a full human man standing just feet away from me, but as soon as I blinked, he was gone. I noped out of there pretty damn fast.
That's wild. I've had a similar experience once at my friend's shop. We were closing up, and I swear I saw something out of the corner of my eye. When I looked, nothing was there. Just gave me a chill. We locked up and left pretty quick. Sometimes, you just can't shake that feeling. It's weird how stuff like that happens when you least expect it.
I had been visiting a relative who lived in the country. As I went out to the car, it was pitch black and I had my infant in my arms. I heard a large animal running toward me. Bear? Mountain lion? Wolf? I had enough time to get the car door open, get the baby in, and shut the door. The dog had gotten off its chain. I've never been so happy to get tackled by a dog.
That sounds intense. It's always surprising how quickly things can change in a quiet setting. You were probably on high alert, thinking about all those big animals. It's funny how a loose dog can bring relief in that moment. I guess it worked out in the end, just a playful dog instead of something dangerous. Definitely a story to remember for sure.
About 2.5 years ago, I experienced sleep paralysis. Couldn't move anything except open and close my eyes. In one corner of my room, which was just within my field of vision, I could see this weird, shadowy figure hunched over staring at me, but I couldn't focus my eyes on it at all. After what seemed like a lifetime, but was probably 10 seconds, I slowly got control of my body back and was able to focus on that corner and see that there was nothing there. I had trouble sleeping for a few weeks after that. It also gave me insight into alien abduction stories.
I've heard about sleep paralysis before. It can be pretty unsettling, like your mind is awake but your body isn't. I've had a friend who experienced something similar. He described seeing shadows and feeling a heavy weight on his chest. It freaked him out, and he avoided sleeping alone for a while. It's strange how our minds can play tricks on us in the dark, making us question everything around us.
When a man came into my work asking if I was there, he has apparently come in before asking weird questions about me. I've seen him around where I live, but never thought anything of it. He recently started showing up at my gym in the morning and also at the coffee place I stop by around lunchtime. I've seen this guy staring at me before, but just thought it was him being socially awkward. It's uncomfortable that he knows my name and where I work, but I know nothing about him.
That sounds pretty unsettling. It's strange when someone keeps showing up in your routine like that. You start to feel like you're being watched, even if they don't mean any harm. It's just one of those situations where you wish you had more context about their intentions. Better to keep your distance and stay aware of your surroundings. No one likes feeling uneasy like that.
Little late for this, but here's the story. I was about 15 years old, just casually playing Xbox with a few friends in the middle of the day. All of a sudden, I hear this horrifying scream come from my mother. I quickly ran out there to her sitting on the floor with a phone in her hand, crying and screaming. Beep Beep is dead, my father. Turns out it was my uncle, who shares the same name with my dad. He lives across the country, so I've only seen him a few times. I believe my dad was dead for a solid 10 minutes, and never took the time with him for granted ever again. Also sitting with him now. TLDR, thought dad was dead.
That sounds really intense. I can't imagine the panic you felt thinking your dad was gone. It's a tough reminder about how quickly things can change. Moments like that definitely make you appreciate family more. I get how you'd want to spend more time with him after going through something so scary. Glad things turned out okay in the end.
Flying to India a few years ago. It was storming around Delhi, so the plane was circling the city waiting for an opportunity to land. The plane had one of those GPS maps that track the plane's movement. It circled several times when the plane was struck by lightning. It began what felt like a free fall straight out of the sky. Passengers hit the ceiling. 90% of the flight attendants were cut/bruised/injured in some way. I was wearing my seatbelt. The whole thing lasted about 5 seconds before the power came back on and pilot regained control, but it was long enough to think, wow, this is how I'm going to die. P.S. You Muthalik is better, not quote Weird Al at me.
That sounds like a wild experience. I've heard about turbulence and lightning strikes, but actually being in it must have been something else. I've had my fair share of bumpy flights too, but I can't imagine being in a freefall like that. It's crazy how quickly things can change up there. Glad you made it through all right.
This will definitely get buried. But last year when the fires swept through Southern California, they got really close to my house. My brother called me while I was at work, prepping the residents for evacuation, and asked what I wanted out of my things before they made everyone get out. It was a tense few days. Luckily, we narrowly avoided the disaster, but others weren't as lucky.
That sounds intense. I remember when wildfires were close to my place too. It puts everything in perspective, like what's really important. When stuff like that happens, you realize how quickly things can change. It's a sigh of relief when everything's okay, but it stays with you. Glad you and your brother managed to get through it without major losses. Those experiences can really shake you up.
As a kid, I was actually trapped in a dark room. It wasn't anything dramatic, but it did leave me with a fear of being trapped in a dark room. Cue adulthood. I used to take really long bathroom breaks at work. So, there I was sitting in the huge handicap stall, enjoying getting paid to poo when someone enters, does their business, and turn the lights off as they leave, out of habit I'm sure. Pitch black, dark. I did not have my cell. I sat quietly on the toilet, in deep panic, breathing slowly, trying to keep calm. Finally, after 10 minutes or so, my coworker enters the bathroom, turns the lights on and says, "Are you in here?" I thanked them for turning the lights on and never took advantage of long poos at work again.
That sounds pretty rough. It's interesting how childhood experiences stick with us. I can relate to being stuck in a situation that brings back old fears. I once got trapped in a basement during a storm. The dark was overwhelming. I can't imagine sitting in that stall for so long, just waiting for the light. It's funny how something like that can change your habits. Glad you got out okay.
I was left home alone for a few days, and on the second morning I wake up and the attic hatch was open. I was absolutely losing my mind looking through the house for things missing / suddenly there. Turns out this actually happens fairly often on cool nights, just it is usually put back up by my father when he goes to work. I don't know how I never learned about this, or saw it when going to pee in the middle of the night.
That sounds pretty unsettling. I get why you were freaking out. Home alone can be creepy, especially with things moving around like that. It's weird how something so normal slipped your mind. I guess we all have those moments where we realize we didn't notice something right in front of us. At least you figured it out before it turned into a bigger deal.
When I was maybe 10 years old or so, I was leaving the emergency ward of the hospital with my dad one late night after visiting my mom. She had gotten in a car accident earlier that day, which was in of itself terrifying, but luckily, she only got badly bruised. We're about halfway through the parking lot when he suddenly pushes me down into a bush, covers me with his body, and warns me to not move a muscle. I was facing down, so I couldn't see anything, but all I could notice for those few minutes was a really bright light, the sound of police sirens nearby, and my dad's fear that something was wrong. Only learned a year or two later that there had been a shootout just a few blocks over, and the cops thought the suspects had fled into the hospital parking lot. Learning that fully renewed my faith and respect for my dad.
It's a wild moment to experience as a kid. Being pushed into a bush while your dad shields you really sticks with you. The fear and confusion can linger. It's crazy to think how close you were to danger and how your dad's instinct kicked in. It's a tough situation, but it probably brought you two closer, understanding the lengths a parent will go to protect their child.
Right before I was getting spinal surgery a few weeks ago, still in recovery, and the doctors put me on laughing gas. At that time I was watching the TV show Lost, and my doctor was the splitting image of Dr. Christian Shepherd. If you don't know the TV show, he got fired for killing a patient while drunk. That kind of added to my worries. Then, I'm in the operating room, and they give me laughing gas. My vision becomes pixelated, and I black out for a minute, then wake back up with my vision feeling like it is in pixels. Then I started screaming, "I'm not in a TV show. I'm not in a TV show." Even creepier, all the people around me are saying, "Let's proceed," in their different creepy doctor voices.
That sounds pretty intense. I can't imagine what that moment must have been like, feeling disconnected and vulnerable. The combination of the gas and the situation must have played tricks on your mind. It's weird how our brains can make us feel like we're in a different reality. Hopefully, the surgery went well and you'll be on the mend soon. It's good that you have a sense of humor about it, though.
Well, mine is pretty stupid after some of these, but last week, a couple of nights before that, the week before that, and so on, I have something akin to REM behavior disorder, and my dreams have a habit of making Stephen King look like he writes children's stories for Sunday school. I wake up a lot of times too afraid to get up to go to the bathroom, and I have a night light. I'm over 30. Uneasy face.
That sounds rough. Nightmares can be really intense, and it's frustrating when they mess with your sleep. Having a night light is a smart move, though. A lot of people don't talk about these kinds of experiences, so it's good you're sharing. It's not stupid at all, it's just part of dealing with those crazy dreams. Hope you find a way to get some better rest soon.
It's before school, like 6 something in the morning. Still dark out. I go to the bathroom because I've got to shit. I'm sitting in the stall doing my thing. Hear the door open, then footsteps. Door closes and locks. Why the hell does the bathroom even have a lock? And then the lights go out. Footsteps, then a knock on my stall. I start literally shitting myself at this point. Figured I'm a 9 UT to be murdered. Teach RNS out an asshole friend, saw me go into the bathroom, and felt like being a dick.
That sounds like one intense morning. It's always the unexpected stuff that gets you. You're just trying to handle business, and your friend decides to mess with you. It's funny how friends can catch you off guard like that. Not the best way to start the day, but at least you made it out okay. Now that's a story you won't forget.
I'm a manager at a super Target, and I recently came close to peeing my pants. I was locking up the store after everyone had left for the night. I'm the only one in this big dark building. I was double-checking each door, and then went back to the receiving area to check the dock doors. I had already set the alarm earlier, and as I approach the door, I hear this voice come from nowhere, step away from the dock door. I guess there's some warning thing that was installed that no one bothered to tell me existed. I had to literally grab my pants to make sure I didn't tinkle, just a little, and to my relief I hadn't.
That's pretty wild. Being alone in a large store at night can get real creepy. Hearing a sudden voice like that must have been unsettling, especially since you weren't expecting it. Totally can relate to that moment of panic, though. It's one of those situations where your brain goes into overdrive. Glad to hear you made it out without any accidents. That would have been an awkward story to explain to your team.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.